the thing that enables us and really impels us to retain our individuality is our vertical connection to God. He created us in his image. We are individuals. And if we lose that individual freedom, that agency, then we cannot worship him effectively. It becomes a form of idolatry where the other person is more important for me than God is.
Hey, welcome to the Overflow Podcast. This is a podcast on a mission to discover how you and I can live a life of abundance, full to overflowing. We're chasing personal growth in a spiritual direction. And in this second season, we're talking about broken love and redeeming grace, how we can navigate the brokenness and find the path to redemption. This is episode 12. My name is Karl Lindsay, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Philip Milosavljevic. How's it going, Philip?
Hey, Karl. Good to hear your voice virtually again. Now, brother, tell me, what is something new that's going on in your life?
Yeah, good question. I want to tell you about a YouTube video I saw the other day. I went to a leadership conference last year called Catalyst, and this was a clip from one of the presentations. John Mark Comer is a pastor in Portland, and don't know if you know him, but he was sharing on how Paul was often says in his letters, follow me as I follow Jesus, and how it's actually a powerful principle of overflow. He shared this quote, the best thing you bring to leadership is your own transforming self.
Wow.
And the fact that like our message, your message, my message isn't limited to us on this podcast and you as a pastor, our lives are actually our message. And I thought that was really a powerful thing to say and a reminder that everything we do, we're living out of the overflow. That's the idea, to be living out of the overflow. I'll link that YouTube video in the description. So make sure you go check out that. Spend 5 minutes listening to that little clip because it's a powerful little nugget.
Wow, that is so good.
Yeah.
That is so good.
Jumping into today's content again, Jennifer Schwirzer has a ministry called Abide Network. So we want to encourage you to check that out. She has a course on anxiety and depression. There's free telephone support groups or coaching and counseling is also offered by their ministry at abide.network. Check out their website.
Well, you're in for such a treat if you're listening today. Jennifer and Karl have a conversation about a topic that many times we don't even think we have to address. It's the issue of codependency and how so many of us fall into relationships where either we're codependent on them or we just might be the person that others are codependent with. So tune in right now to this conversation with Karl and Jennifer.
Jennifer, welcome back to the Overflow Podcast. So good to have you again.
It's so good to be here.
Jennifer lives in Florida with her husband, spends her time speaking truth into people's lives through her counseling ministry, the Abide Network. So as well as a counselor, she is an author and a musician. So these are two other avenues which she's sharing the gospel truth with others. Jennifer, do you have a favorite out of those three callings?
I would say probably author right now, but honestly, I have like career ADD, so ADHD, so I kind of have to jump from one to another or get extremely frustrated.
Well, that's nice that you have options for sure. Speaking of being an author, you have a third book in the 13-week series that came out this year. Is that right? Earlier this year?
That's correct. And it's so funny how it came about. It was a lady that I know named Jane Sato. She's Japanese and she's very bossy. I love her, but she's bossy and always tells me what to do. And I would tell her that to her face. And she said to me, because I had 13 weeks to peace, 13 weeks to love. And she goes, you need to do 13 weeks to joy. So I'm like, Jane, okay, just you can't tell me what to do. But then the Holy Spirit said, Jennifer, love, joy, peace. I mean, those are the spiritual fruits of the Spirit, and you should do it. And then I looked at a vision that I had heard about that an individual had where she saw that the people of God had love, joy, and peace. And when I saw that, I realized I had to write 13 Weeks to Joy. But the other reason I did is because I have four weekly telephone support groups under the Abide Network, which is the counseling network that I run. Under that umbrella, I have 4 of them, and they use my books. And I had to create some new material because there were 2 people that had been doing them for like 4 years. So I just had to do some new material for them. And so, we have 13 Weeks to Joy now.
Okay, so they're a workbook series, right? So can you step us through those journeys? Is it love is first or peace? Which one comes first?
Yeah, so peace was the first, and peace deals with me being mentally healthy. And then love is the second one, and that's my relationships being mentally healthy. And joy is basically how to have as many positive emotions as we could possibly have. So I dig into things like just feelings in general. I talk about shame and what to do with shame. I talk about awe. We don't often think of wonder and awe, though that's a positive emotion that God has created us for. And awe has a measurable, repeatedly validated effect on people's character. Like, people who experience awe are better people. And it's been that outcome has been duplicated multiple times by this guy out of Berkeley, who's like the doyen of awe therapy, and his name escapes me right now. But so it's like really cool to look into different positive emotions and how to get there. I don't think realistically we should always have just positive emotions, but I think most of us could stand to have more than we have. Yeah, it's always. Yeah. It
relates to that overflow idea that we're talking about on the whole podcast. Is just being full of God's love so that we are overflowing with those positive emotions. And you've kind of got it there, same way we've been thinking about it, is filling up first with peace and then pouring into your relationships out of that peace. So that's really good. That's good. Well, this is our third part in this mini-series on broken love. So far, we've talked about loneliness and trauma, so you can listen to those conversations in episodes 10 and 11. But today we're going to talk about codependency in relationships, but not just romantic relationships, because we can show signs of codependency in familial and family and friendship relationships as well.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to start with a basic definition, Jennifer, and then we can go from there. From what I understand, codependency involves sacrificing one's personal needs to try to meet the needs of others. So someone who is codependent has an extreme focus outside themselves. Their thoughts and actions revolve around other people, such as spouses or relatives. So I want to throw this at you. Since we're coming from a Christian worldview, that definition doesn't sound that terrible. It sounds rather other-centered and selfless. So are we talking about a mousetrap here loaded with cheese? How would you describe codependency? Why is it so bad?
Okay, that was such a good question. And I agree with your assessment. What happens if you have a purely secular definition of codependency and you take it to its really logical conclusion, you end up ruling out sacrificial love. So we have to be very careful with like these concepts, although I would say that the concept is a valid one, and there are the scriptures and certainly our Christian experience speaks to it, and there's truths there. I think we need to be careful about embracing a fully secular concept and expecting it not to contradict the truths of God at some point. So I didn't agree with the first line of that. The first line was sacrificing your own needs for the needs of another person.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know a mother on earth who is a decent mother worth her salt that didn't sacrifice her sleep that she needed for her child.
So that's not really codependent. It's just, no, that's love is what that is. So, but what I would say is, this is how I see it, Karl, as a Christian, as a believer in Jesus and a follower of Jesus. In principle, I embrace the concept that I live first and foremost to please God, and secondly to serve other people, and last to serve myself. God, and even people.
God, people, and then self is behind those things. That I live to serve other people. So that does not mean I don't take care of myself, because when I take care of myself, I'm actually better able to serve other people. So that doesn't necessarily lead to self-neglect or self-abuse or of any kind. But I embrace that concept. What happens with what we call codependency is I am doing for another person what they could do for themselves. And by doing that, I am harming them. So I can still have that others focus, but I can say, no, I have a boundary here. I will not do that for you because you can do it for yourself. And I will be positively weakening you by doing it for you.
Right.
And that, to me, is the core of codependency, is where basically a person is, well, that's actually what that would be. A more precise term for that would be enabling, where I'm doing for another what they could do for themselves. That's related to codependency. It's not exactly the same thing. I would say this. I would say that there are two principles that uphold all relationships. And I would say all mature relationships between equals in particular, which is where we see the codependency come out, is in these relationships between equals that resemble more of a parent-child relationship because one is being very under-functioning and the other's over-functioning. So in relationships with equals, there's two principles that come into play. One is I must retain my individuality, my personal freedom, my character, my personality, who I am. I must retain that in order to be able to love another equal. A wife, for instance, should never lose her personality to her husband, or the other way around. Because as soon as you lose your individuality, then you cease to be able to love that other person. Then the other principle is intimacy. There has to be a sort of a fusion or like a blurring of the boundaries in order to open up to a close relationship. So two things are going on in a good relationship, a healthy relationship. And there's tension between those two things. And we have to maintain that tension. And that can be a really difficult thing to do. What happens with codependency is that person sacrifices their individuality for the relationship, for the intimacy. So they define themselves by that pleasing that other person.
Okay.
And basically it turns into idolatry at that point, because the thing that enables us and really impels us to retain our individuality is our vertical connection to God. He created us in his image. We are individuals. And if we lose that individual freedom, that agency, then we cannot worship him effectively.
Yeah.
That's a whole great controversy about that. So we retain that individuality through our connection to God. So that means that when we lose it, it becomes a form of idolatry where the other person is more important for me than God is.
Yeah. So you've connected us to God there. Can you connect the dots there with this idea that we're talking about broken love? God obviously is love. So how does codependency become broken love? It's just that warping of those relationships.
What's happening in a codependent relationship is I become so afraid of displeasing the other person or not taking care of them or whatever, that I really turn away from God in that process.
Yeah.
And I am no longer, and really it's that unselfish veneer is masking supreme self-concern. I mean, like I am, like, for instance, if you're in a relationship with someone who gets angry and is defensive, and you keep tiptoeing around them, walking on eggshells, and denying your own individuality and your own boundaries because you don't want to displease them, what ends up happening is you're not really concerned about hurting their feelings. You're concerned about hurting your own feelings. You don't like the way they react. It makes you uncomfortable. So you don't have boundaries. You just keep going along with whatever they're trying to pressure you to do. And you're really very in that formula. It seems like, oh, that person's sacrificing for that. But really, they're just self-concerned. They're just don't want to be made uncomfortable. They don't want to deal with that other person's negative response. Now, honestly, like sometimes it's a really hard situation where you need to like move away or something because a person could get violent if you cross them.
Yep.
So I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying that there is some self-concern when you're so afraid of offending someone and you know that you have to speak truth and you have to have your boundaries. You still won't do that. you can be, it really can be a form of selfishness. It's very carefully cloaked selfishness, but it's selfishness.
Yeah. So that's really an important point to grasp, I think, is that when we have to be able to look at ourselves and say, hey, I feel like I'm trying to be unselfish, but is there something deeper? Is that unselfishness masking selfishness? What is that unselfishness supporting?
If I really care about you and you keep doing something offensive, I'm going to tell you, because you will do that same offensive thing to other people and it will hurt you socially. And if I say nothing, I'm actually putting you in harm's way socially by not doing my part to let you know that what you're doing is offensive.
Yeah. Yeah. So
that's just an example.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's broken love for you. It seems like real love, but it's broken. It's not true. It's not really principled.
What are the roots of this toxic behavior? Like we've talked about that kind of masking there. You mentioned attachment theory in our previous conversations. Is it related to that in any way? How deep does it go?
Yeah, I think so. I think that plus imitative behavior, like if you grew up in a home where one person constantly and consistently capitulated to the other, and there was no mutuality, for instance, in the parental dyad, the mom and dad, one parent dominated the other and the other always yielded. You've learned that behavior from the master, so to speak. But I would think also whenever we don't have a strong, secure bond with a primary caregiver as babies and as young children, it disadvantages us for future relationships. And we have to be more intentional about relational health when we don't have a robust bonding background, if I could say it that way. So yeah, I would think that would be both the attachments and also learning imitatively how to be codependent. And it's true that some people come into adulthood more inclined that way than others.
Yeah. Okay. So can I spiritualize it for a little bit? Is it anything to do with us not finding our value in who God says we are? Like how much does that come into it?
Us not fun. Absolutely. Like if as I was saying a few minutes ago, if I am overly concerned about pleasing any one human being, it's okay to want to please other people. That's not a bad thing in and of itself. I want to make people happy. It's ridiculous to say don't care about pleasing people, care about pleasing God, as if they're two completely opposed things. They're not.
No.
But if there's a line where my desire to please someone becomes idolatry because I am lying in order to keep that person happy, effectively lying to keep that person happy by withholding from them the truth about who I am and about what I think about what they're doing or whatever is happening.
Is codependency anything to do with me meeting their needs because I'm scared that if I don't meet their needs, meet their demands, they'll stop loving me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely, positively, 100%. Yes. But the thing is that you keep doing something to make sure they love you, but you never really know if they love you because you keep catering to them.
Right.
If the only way you can really be secure in that person's love is if you stop catering to them and they still love you, but you never give that a chance to come out. And so it's really accepting a pseudo love in place of real love.
Okay, that's good. Pseudo love. Yeah, which is the same thing as synonym for a broken love that we're talking about. Yeah.
And I think that people intuit often that they're not going to get real love from someone and they'll resort to unhealthy forms of love because they just, nature hates a vacuum.
Yeah.
And if there's no real love there, something's going to come into that vacuum, So to some degree, it's you can't put all the blame on the codependent people because they know that they can't know deep down that they can't get real love from that person.
Yeah.
And so they settle for less. Mm-hmm.
Which is why we need to find our value in who God says we are and not rely on our value being derived from our friend or our girlfriend or boyfriend, etc.
Right.
Yeah. So when we are acting from a place of codependency, is it fair to say that we may start seeing God with some codependent tendencies too? Maybe as someone who is trying to interfere in our lives. Is that too much to say?
That's an interesting question. No, I think that if you have watched your parents grow up where one constantly appeased the other, never really had that individuality I was talking about a few minutes ago, always yielded to the wishes of the other, and did it to keep peace in the home, I mean, you'd be much more inclined to see God that way, as someone who you have to placate and appease, and that who doesn't really want or respect your individuality. Yes, yeah, definitely could set you up for that. The thing is that if you relate to God as a codependent, as if he is willing to receive that broken kind of love from you, you're not really relating to God, the real God,
Yeah.
You're relating to a partial understanding, I would say, of who God is.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we've been trying to cover with the podcast, just bring everything back to how we see God and how make sure we've got that correct understanding of him. Let's talk about practical things. Can you give us some indicators of some common ways that codependency may surface in a relationship? So how can we kind of spot it?
If you're afraid to tell someone the truth, and you notice that in your heart, you do not feel close, you do not feel really connected to them because of something that you then cannot talk about, I would say that's a red flag.
Can you give maybe an example there?
Well, the classic example is one partner of a married dyad is an addict.
Okay.
There's some really great material from Juliet Van Heerden. She has a book. She was married to an addict for many years, and she said she did a show for me with me on A Multitude of Counselors, which is a program on 3ABN network, Three Angels Broadcasting Network, where she talked about that relationship and she talked about codependency. And she said something so brilliant. She said, if you're in a relationship with the addict is addicted to drugs or whatever, and you're addicted to the addict.
Yeah.
And that is true, that people become addicted to the person who is addicted to the drugs. And that's what supports that it really ends up supporting the addiction.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I'll give you a practical example. The wife is constantly cleaning up after the husband. He comes home drunk. He, vomits on the floor. She cleans it up. He can't get out of bed the next morning. She calls the boss and says he has a cold. He doesn't show up at family events. She says that he's got a cold or that he's under the weather. She's constantly lying for him. And she knows he's got a problem, but she never says anything about it. Acts like everything's okay because she doesn't want to deal with his defensiveness and anger in response to that.
Yeah.
That's a classic presentation of codependency. And a lot of what's going on there is she's dependent on the very small rewards she gets from him for being a liar, for lying to him, or at least refraining from telling. He rewards her for that, and he punishes her for telling the truth. And so she stays in that relationship. So effectively, she's addicted to the addict. And a lot of times people in relationships like that feel like they wouldn't know what to do with themselves. They're so used to relating that way. They wouldn't know what to do with themselves apart from that relationship.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah, that's a real difficult spot. So like we've been talking about this broken love idea, this is a form of broken love. So what can we do to restore the brokenness? How can we find healing?
Well, that's a very broad question, but I would say you have to start. It is, but that's okay. You have to start telling the truth. And I think that, maybe writing a letter or having some kind of context in which you disclose that you realize that you've fallen into a codependency pattern, but always begin that admission by admitting your own fault. This is what I've done. This is why I've done it. It's safer. It's easier for me. So take what responsibility you can take,
Yep.
and then be very plain with the person about what is going on and your views of it. I would caution against doing it in a situation where the person is prone to violence and the person might be putting themselves in harm's way. So this is something that really should be done, if in extreme cases anyway, alongside a therapist who can help guide through the process, or someone that can kind of oversee it.
Some accountability partner.
But that's what needs to happen. There needs to be some truth telling, and some admission of, and it starts with you. You did it. Like it takes two to tango. You've been going along with this program, and without judgment for them, and judgment for yourself, not harsh judgment anyway, but taking responsibility for what's going on as much as you can, and then being very plain with them about the pattern that you see, and ask them to get help. Now, it depends on what's going on in the relationship. If it is an addiction that the codependent person is in a relationship with an addict, it's appropriate to do what we call an intervention in many cases. And that's where you take other people with you, all the loved ones, as many loved ones as you can find of that person. And they ask for an opportunity to speak to him. And they've each written a letter. And you go around the circle and each person reads the letter. And basically the letter says, I love you. You have a problem and you need to do something about it. And then at the end of that, you make an appeal to that individual to get help. And in the case of interventions for addiction, you have the place where they're going to get treatment all organized ahead of time. And the ride to the airport and the plane ticket, everything's organized ahead of time. And I knew this because we did it for a loved one in my family who would probably be dead right now if we hadn't done it.
Wow.
So in extreme cases where there's addiction involved, you do an intervention and you just tell them the truth. So for the first time maybe in your life, you're telling them the truth about, what they've been doing. And often it is accompanied by, I won't do this anymore. I won't live with you. You can't come to my house, or some kind of limit or boundary that you've never had the courage to place before. Yeah.
No, that's good. Those are some good thoughts. So you talked about that idea of takes two to tango. So is it possible to be in a relationship where only one of the partners is codependent, and you kind of maybe realize that, this person is codependent on me? Does that actually happen, or is it always two?
That's a good question. Well, really what typically happens with codependent, like we're going to have dependency. That's healthy. Interdependency is healthy. So, but you're asking if someone can be in an unhealthy way dependent on a person who is not playing along with it. And I would say, that's possible. And that means you should have boundaries with that person.
Yeah. Okay. Just setting up those
you should
boundaries.
Not.
Right.
Yeah. You should have boundaries and not make it so easy for them to be dependent on you. A lot of times takes the form of one person is over-functioning and the other is under-functioning. So say, for instance, a kid is living with their parents. The kid is 35 years old.
Mm-hmm.
They get free housing at the parents. The mother would never consider charging her children rent. That would be a terrible thing to do. The child is not trying to find a job. He's just too laid back. He's on video games all day. If the job doesn't pay enough, he gets all disgruntled. He never finished school, so he doesn't really have any training, and everything is beneath him. He mows the lawn sometimes. He's very nice to his mom. He cooks dinner once a week. So it's not kind of nice to have around. But the mom knows that the guy's underfunctioning because she's making it easy for him to underfunction.
Right.
What she needs to do is stop making it easy for him to underfunction for his own good. Yeah. And that Karl is hard, because especially for women, because we're so tenderhearted. And so when she says to her son, look, I'm charging you rent starting September 1st, $200 the first month, $300 the next, and $450 thereafter. And you can work it off, by working around the house up to this much money. She starts having boundaries on him.
Yeah.
He's going to interpret that as hate and as rejection, and he might really feel hurt.
Yeah.
And she, as a tender-hearted woman, doesn't want to do that to him, or doesn't want in any way, shape, or form to lead him into a place where he doubts her love. But he has misinterpreted her codependency as love. And it's up to her to set that record straight and show him what real love looks like.
Yeah.
Real love does not encourage underfunctioning. That cripples people. So real love says, no, I'm not going to do for you what you can do for yourself. And I speak as a mom. I've been through it. I have 2 kids, and they're beautiful people. I love them. We're very close. But you learn. And I have a sister that lives close by, and she's got 4 kids. And so this is the kind of stuff we struggle with, where to draw the line. And one really good thing is to be able to have open dialogue about things. That's really a big first step, is to be able to say, for instance, in the situation with the kid, there should be discussion. Like, you're living here, you're 35. Let's talk about this. I could be harming you by letting you stay here for free. Let's make this an open discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
In nature, the eagle pushes her baby out of the nest so the baby learns how to fly. That's not happening here. So we need to talk about discussing it is just paramount.
Well, that's what we talked about.
Really healthy changes.
So we talked about last week with the idea of communication. We were discussing it in relationship to trauma, but it's the same thing here. Communication is vital. And that's where it comes down to the other things you mentioned, is just, if needed, having that intervention and just expressing what I see, what this other person sees, and this is how we think you can be, you can make some changes in your life, and we'd love to help you do that. Expressing that kind of desire, that love for change, rather than the love that allows you to, or the broken love that allows them to stay in their broken mess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So as we close, do you have a couple of questions that we can think about, maybe as we're reflecting on our own relationships with family, with friends, and the way we interact with others as it relates to codependency?
Yeah, definitely. Is there anyone in my life that I am overfunctioning, and in overfunctioning, I am allowing them to underfunction? And then the second question would be, is there anyone in my life I cannot be honest with about our relationship?
Yeah.
I talk about the ability to talk about the relationship itself is what I call opening a workroom. It's the most high risk type conversation you can have with anyone. You start with the really surface stuff. You talk about the weather, politics, or whatever. Then you get into ideas and feelings and experiences. But when you start talking with a person about the relationship with that person, that is the inner sanctum. And that's the most, I would say, the most difficult conversation to have, but also the most productive conversation to have, as long as it doesn't escalate into yelling and, I hate you and you're not being good to me, But that's what we're going to talk about next, right?
Yep, conflict. That's right. Next week's coming. So those questions are good. Overfunctioning is a really important thing to think about, and being honest. Well, how can our listeners find out more about your work, connect with you? We've talked about the abide.network website. Remind us a little bit about what is on there.
I have 20 professional and paraprofessional counselors and coaches that do distance counseling. And what you can do is fill out an intake form. It comes to me, and I place you with an appropriate helper. So that's the main thing that Abide does. We also have trainings, lots of different trainings. We have an anxiety and depression course that we're offering to people, bundled with a coach if they like. We have a lot of really great stuff. They should go and check it out. I also have a personal website at jenniferjill.org, that has information about me. As you know, I kind of have I speak, and I used to travel and speak before COVID. Now I speak on Zoom.
Yeah. And then you've got the 13 weeks workbooks available at your website there as well.
They're on both websites. Yeah.
Yeah.
13 weeks. You can also get the 13 weeks books on Amazon.
Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. So yeah, speaking of books, last question. Do you have any resources specific to codependency that you can share with us? You mentioned the multitude of counselors before.
Yeah. I would say the best book hands down for codependency issues is the book Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend. That was a deal breaker. It was a huge success because it was addressing the very thing you brought up at the very beginning of the podcast, and that is what's the difference between sacrificial love and codependency, because they look the same on the surface. So Cloud and Townsend did a great thing by distinguishing those two things and addressing the fact that a lot of Christians were engaging in what was basically codependency, thinking that it was love. So that is an excellent book. And then I mentioned Juliet Van Heerden, and I will tell you about this program called A Multitude of Counselors. It's on Three Angels Broadcasting Network. So if you go to a multitudeofcounselors.tv, you'll see all of the programs are up on the website, and it's season 2 and program number 22. Juliet Van Heerden, she is great. She did a beautiful job explaining that.
All right. So we'll put a link to that in the description, as well as Boundaries books. Thanks so much for joining us this week, Jennifer. We'll be back next week with part 4 and conflict.
Sounds good.
Man, Karl, that was so good. I have to be really honest with you. That one hit close to home for me.
Yeah, tell me more.
Oh, well, early on in our marriage, Elaine and I were just discovering who we were, discovering a little bit more about just personality. I mean, you're going to be discovering about your spouse forever. But, I just began to realize this woman is a powerhouse. She's got an agenda. She's got an agenda for her agendas. And sometimes I can be a little bit more passive and just kind of go with the flow of things. And what that means is Elena will have an agenda for me if I don't have one for myself, whether it's about just something we need to buy, things in life, coming up in the future. And I found myself not wanting to disappoint her regularly. And I can easily go back to that space where I realized I started to become a little bit codependent with my wife. And I didn't want to displease her when she would come up with an idea for something and I hadn't even thought about it. And I'm just like, I don't know how I feel about this, but I don't want to hurt her.
Right.
And that's a tough space to be in. Jennifer talks about this notion of the tension in relationships and how that is very common, but it's important that you remain in a space of tension as opposed to just taking it and finding yourself living in codependency.
Right. Yeah. And that connection with broken love, as we've been talking about in this series, how codependency is a form of that, and this idea that unselfishness is masking selfishness. You're pretending to be unselfish and just say, it's you choose, you do everything. And like in your story, really, you just wanted to make sure that you were pleasing her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. The other thing that I find so important that was brought out is this notion of understanding your boundaries. You've got to be able to communicate with people in your life, especially those that are close to you. What are your boundaries? And then when the issue arises, hey, you know what? I'm really sorry, but I addressed this with you last time, and man, I just can't go there. I can't do this, or that's not a conversation I want to have with you, or X, Y, and Z. You need to know what your boundaries are in life, as opposed to just simply letting people walk all over you.
Yeah, yeah. The story of the lady she interviewed on her TV program, A Multitude of Counselors, that idea of being addicted to the addict, I think that really sums up codependency well, in the sense that when you think someone else is the addict, when reality is that you are also kind of addicted to the relationship that they're creating with you, just because it fills that void.
Yeah, absolutely. The other last thing I guess I'll just mention is this notion that when whether it's an addict relationship or others, we really rely on what people think of us, and to let them down hurts at this core level, because in some bad way, we've allowed their story of what they think about us to dominate God's story, God's influence of what he believes about us. So really, it's about getting back to the place where God has his throne on your identity, and you're not literally crippled when other people think about you maybe in a negative way when you stand up for yourself. That's really, really important.
Yeah, God is not someone who doesn't respect our individuality. He does respect it. So we have to remember that is the true character of God. So we don't want to relate to him like a codependent. Well, check out abide.network if you want to connect with Jennifer and her team. She's got a ton of resources there. Maybe those 13 Weeks to Peace, Love, and Joy books, those workbooks may be helpful to you. We'll link to all that in the description. So let's repeat those questions again she gave us. Number 1, is there anyone in my life that I am overfunctioning for? And in overfunctioning for them, am I allowing them to underfunction? And then question 2, is there anyone in my life that I cannot be honest with? Think about those as we move through this next week.
Wow. And just one last thing, just remember what the definition that she started us off with for codependency. I am doing for another person what they can and would do for themselves if you held up your boundaries. So that is really important. Well, we want to leave you with a blessing as we do each week. And so let me bless you today. Lord, I ask that you would be with our friends listening today. Fill them with hope. Fill them with what you truly desire for them, and that is a life of abundance. And so, God, I ask right now that you would help us just truly be cleansed of any manipulation we're putting on other people, any extra burdens of causing others to have to overfunction for us. God, help us to take ownership of our life. And Lord, I also pray that we would not be those who are codependent with others in a negative way. Please bring revelation to us. But God, I also pray just simply for your blessing over our friends who are listening now. God, give them your peace, understanding, and bless them with your grace that covers a multitude of sin and gives us hope for the future. In your name we pray, amen. And so as we say every week, we pray that you would choose the overflow.
Hey, thanks so much for listening in on our conversation today. If something we said made you think, or maybe you just want to say hello or give some feedback, we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at hello@choosetooverflow.com. You can find us on Instagram at choosetooverflow, or check out our website, choosetooverflow.com, where you can find more content, including a reflection guide for today's episode to help you take the conversation further. That's choosetooverflow.com. We also want to thank the Loma Linda University Church for their support of this project. And if this was helpful to you, please leave us a review, share with a friend or three, and subscribe to stay connected. We'll be releasing new episodes every Monday. Thanks again for listening. We hope you choose to overflow this week. Let's chat again soon.